They kicked me out of my childhood home on Christmas morning, but a year later, I walked back in as the new owner. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. I grew up in a small town in Ohio. Our house wasn't big, but it was filled with warmth and laughter. My mom loved Christmas more than anything. Every year, she'd decorate the tree with handmade ornaments and bake cookies that made the whole house smell sweet. I remember sitting by the fireplace with her, listening to music while she told me stories about how she and my dad built this home together. Back then, I thought life would always feel that safe. But everything changed when she passed away. I was 16, scared and heartbroken. My dad, Robert, couldn't handle the loss. At first, I thought he just needed time. But soon, he met someone, a woman named Patricia. She seemed kind at first, always smiling, always helpful. I even wanted to like her. But little by little, she showed her true self. Patricia had a way of twisting things. She'd make small comments that sounded innocent, but carried poison. You know, Sam, your dad works so hard, and you're still just figuring things out. Or, your mom spoiled you too much, didn't she? My dad started believing her. He began to look at me differently, like I was a burden instead of his daughter. Before long, everything about the house changed too. The warmth disappeared. Patricia redecorated, throwing away my mom's things, the curtains she sewed, the photos she framed. It didn't feel like home anymore. I started spending more time outside, taking long walks just to avoid being inside. I missed my mom more than ever, and my dad felt further away every day. By the time I turned 18, I could feel something was coming. That Christmas morning, I came downstairs hoping we might have a peaceful day. But instead, I saw 2 suitcases by the door, mine. Patricia stood there with her arms crossed, wearing that same cold smile. "You're grown now, Samantha," she said. "You should start your own life. This isn't your house anymore." I looked at my dad, waiting for him to say something. But he didn't. He just stood there, silent, avoiding my eyes. That silence hurt more than anything Patricia could have said. I grabbed my coat and walked out without another word. Snow was falling, and the world felt so still. I sat in my car, staring at the house that held all my memories, my mom's laughter, the smell of cookies, the warmth of family. And now it was all gone. That night, I made myself a promise. I would never forget this pain. I would turn it into something stronger. One day, I would build a life so solid that no one could ever throw me out again. After my mom passed away, the house didn't feel like the same place anymore. Patricia slowly took over everything, the space, the routines, even my dad's attention. She always spoke sweetly when he was around, but when we were alone, her tone changed. She'd say things that chipped away at me little by little. "You really don't do much around here, do you?" Or, "Maybe if you tried harder, your dad would be proud of you." She said it with a smile, but her eyes always carried something mean. I tried to ignore her, thinking maybe she'd warm up to me. I helped around the house, cooked dinner, cleaned, and stayed polite. But it didn't matter. Patricia found fault in everything I did. If I cleaned the kitchen, she'd say I missed a spot. If I tried to talk to my dad, she'd interrupt and turn the conversation toward herself. My dad, Robert, started believing her stories. Whenever Patricia told him I was lazy or disrespectful, he'd sigh and shake his head. I wanted to explain, to tell him what was really happening, but every time I tried, she twisted my words. "I don't know why she hates me so much," she'd say with fake tears, and my dad would comfort her instead of me. I stopped trying after a while. I felt invisible in my own house. The only place I could find peace was my room. It became my little world, quiet, safe, and away from her constant remarks. I'd put on headphones, stare at old pictures of my mom, and wonder what she'd say if she saw what her home had turned into. Sometimes I wanted to leave, but I didn't have the courage or the money to start over. I kept telling myself that maybe things would change. When Christmas came, I held on to hope. It was my mom's favorite time of year, and I thought maybe, just maybe, Patricia would let the day be peaceful. I wrapped small gifts for my dad, and even one for her, just trying to keep the spirit alive. But that morning, instead of music and the smell of breakfast, I saw my bags packed near the front door. Patricia stood there, dressed perfectly as always, holding a cup of coffee like it was any other day. "You're an adult now, Sam," she said with that same fake smile. "Time to find your own place." For a moment, I thought she was joking. I looked at my dad, waiting for him to stop her. But he didn't say a word. He just looked away, pretending not to see the hurt in my eyes. That silence told me everything. I picked up my bag slowly, feeling the cold air from the open door hit my face. No tears came out. I just walked past them, step by step, until I was outside. Behind me, the door closed. That sound, that single click, felt like the end of everything I once called home. That night, the cold was sharp enough to bite through my coat. I sat in my car across the street from the house, watching the lights in the windows. Patricia and my dad were inside, probably having dinner, maybe laughing. It used to be my place at that table. Now, I was just an outsider looking in. The snow kept falling, soft and silent, and I couldn't stop thinking how fast everything had changed. Just a few years ago, that house had been my whole world. Now, I didn't even belong there. I had nowhere to go. My friends were busy with their own families for the holidays, and I didn't want to bother anyone. I leaned the seat back, wrapped a blanket around myself, and tried to close my eyes, but the tears wouldn't stop. The cold made it worse. My hands were shaking, my nose was numb, and I felt completely alone. But in that moment, something inside me hardened. I whispered to myself, "I'll never beg to come back." I meant it. The next morning, I started looking for work. It wasn't easy. I didn't have experience or much money. I finally found a job at a small diner downtown. The pay was low, but it was something. The first few weeks were rough. I worked long hours, took the bus every day, and sometimes slept in my car when I couldn't afford gas to drive back to the cheap room I rented later. Still, I kept going. I worked double shifts whenever I could. I cleaned tables, refilled coffee, and smiled at customers even when my feet ached. Every tip I got, I saved. I stopped buying anything I didn't need. No new clothes, no fancy meals, nothing. My focus was clear. I wanted to build a life that was mine. At night, after work, I started taking classes. I'd always been interested in houses, design, and how people built their lives around them. Becoming a real estate agent felt right. It wasn't just about selling homes. It was about rebuilding my dream. I'd sit in those late-night classes, exhausted but determined, taking notes and imagining the day I'd have my own keys to a place I bought myself. Sometimes, when I walked home after class, I'd see families through their windows, sitting together, laughing, and it hurt. But that hurt kept me moving. I promised myself I'd never depend on anyone again. Not on a man, not on family, not on anyone who could take things away. Months turned into years. I climbed slowly, one small step at a time. Every dollar I saved, every test I passed, felt like a piece of my strength coming back. I wasn't that broken girl in the car anymore. I was building something steady, something no one could ever throw me out of again. Years went by, and the life I had once dreamed about slowly started to take shape. All the long nights, double shifts, and sleepless study hours finally began to pay off. I passed my real estate exam, got my license, and started working for a small agency. In the beginning, no one knew me. I was the quiet one who stayed late, checked every detail twice, and never complained. But with time, people started to notice my work. I treated every client with care, helped them find homes they truly loved, and soon word started to spread. Within a few years, I became one of the top realtors in my city. My calendar was always full, and for the first time in my life, I didn't have to worry about rent or food. I bought a small apartment, decorated it myself, and filled it with things that made me feel calm: soft lights, simple furniture, and photos that reminded me of peace, not pain. I was proud of myself, but the truth is, some nights still felt heavy, especially around Christmas. That time of year always brought memories I tried to forget. Every time I passed a house glowing with lights and laughter, it brought back flashes of the past. My mom's voice, the smell of cookies, the sound of her singing while decorating the tree. And then, just as quickly, the image of standing at that door with my bags packed. I told myself I had moved on, but a part of me still carried that sting. No amount of success could fully erase it. I had built a new life, but I hadn't really faced the old one. Then one December, something unexpected happened. I was sitting in my office, going through new property listings. The holidays were always a busy time, and I had several clients looking for family homes. I scrolled through pictures, one after another, and then suddenly I froze. The house on my screen looked familiar. Too familiar. I leaned closer, my heart pounding. The number, the front porch, the old oak tree in the yard. It was my childhood home. The same one Patricia had thrown me out of years ago. I stared at the listing for a long time, reading every line carefully. It was for sale. The photos showed the house in rough shape, peeling paint, cracked driveway, overgrown bushes. It looked nothing like the home my mom had once filled with love. For a few minutes, I didn't move. It felt like time had stopped. My heart hurt, but at the same time, I felt something else, a quiet sense of purpose. I had spent years running from my past, but now it was right in front of me again. That December morning, I realized maybe fate was giving me a chance, not for revenge, but for something bigger. Something that would close the story I'd been carrying all these years. When I saw the pictures of the house, it felt like someone had punched the air out of me. I stared at the screen for a long time, barely believing what I was looking at. The front porch was falling apart, the paint was cracked and faded, and the garden that my mom once filled with flowers was now covered in weeds. The listing said the house had been sitting empty for months, taxes unpaid, and the owners were desperate to sell. The names on the record were Robert and Patricia Miller, my father and stepmother. For a few seconds, I just sat there frozen. My heart was racing, and my mind kept jumping between memories. My mom laughing in the kitchen, me running through the hallway as a kid, and that last Christmas morning when Patricia told me to leave. I never thought I'd see that house again, and certainly not like this. A part of me almost felt sorry for them. The home they once cared about was now falling apart, the warmth completely gone. But another part of me, the part that had slept in a freezing car and built herself from nothing, felt calm and steady. This wasn't about revenge. It was about taking back what was stolen from me. I didn't tell anyone at work about my connection to the property. I kept it professional, just another deal on paper. But inside, I knew this was personal. It wasn't just a house to me, it was my story, my beginning, and my closure. That evening, I drove out to see it in person. The sun was setting, and the whole neighborhood looked quiet. When I pulled up, my chest tightened. The front door still had the same handle, the same old porch steps that creaked when you walked on them. The house looked smaller than I remembered, but it still carried a weight, like it remembered me too. I stood there for a long time, just looking at it. I thought about my mom, about how much love she had poured into every corner. Then I thought about the day I was kicked out, and how far I'd come since then. I wasn't the scared girl who left crying in the snow. I was someone stronger, someone who could finally decide what this house would mean to her. I went back to my office and filed an offer that same night, full cash. No negotiations, no waiting. I wanted it done quickly and quietly. I had saved for years, worked myself to exhaustion, and now I was in a position to buy the very place where my pain began. When the offer was accepted a few days later, I sat in my car again, the same way I had all those years ago outside that house. But this time I wasn't crying. I was smiling softly, because I knew the story was finally starting to turn in my favor. A week later, I drove back to that same street I once left in tears. The snow had started to fall again, light and slow, just like the night I was kicked out. The neighborhood looked older now, quieter. Some of the houses had been repainted, a few had Christmas lights hanging, but the one that stood before me was tired and forgotten. My old home. I parked across the road and just sat there for a moment, staring. It was strange. I had imagined this day so many times, but now that it was real, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like life had come full circle. I stepped out of the car, and the sound of the gravel under my boots brought back memories. Every step toward the porch made my chest tighten. The wood creaked the same way it used to when I'd run out to meet my mom as a kid. I reached for the railing, chipped and splintered, and took a deep breath before climbing the steps. The front door was exactly as I remembered, the same faded red color, the same dent near the handle from when my dad once hit it while moving furniture. I placed my hand on the doorknob and just stood there, feeling the cold metal against my palm. For years I had dreamed of this house, but not like this. Not empty, not broken, not without the people who once made it home. Inside, it was quiet. The air was still, filled with that faint old smell of wood and dust. I walked slowly through each room. The living room where the Christmas tree once stood was bare. The kitchen, once warm and bright, now had cracked tiles and empty shelves. My footsteps echoed, and for a moment, I felt the ghost of my past walking beside me. That scared girl who had stood in this same spot years ago with nowhere to go. Then I reminded myself who I was now. I wasn't that girl anymore. I was the woman who had worked for everything she had, who had learned how to survive and rebuild. I walked to the dining table where the paperwork waited, took the pen from the agent's hand, and signed my name. It was done. The house that once pushed me out now belonged to me. The irony hit hard. The girl they had called useless now owned everything they had lost. I stood by the window for a while, looking out at the yard covered in snow. I could almost hear my mom's voice in the back of my mind, gentle and proud. You did it, Sam. A single tear slid down my cheek, not from sadness, but from relief. I had finally taken back the piece of my life they tried to erase. This house, once a symbol of pain, was mine again, and this time no one could ever take it away. It didn't take long for the eviction notice to reach them. I had known it would cause a scene, but I wasn't expecting the moment to come so soon. A few days after the paperwork was finalized, I was sitting in my office, finishing up a deal, when the door burst open. The sound made everyone turn their heads. Patricia stormed in, her face red with anger, holding the folded eviction letter in her hand. Behind her stood my father, Robert, quieter but just as stunned. The room went silent. For a second, she didn't seem to notice me. Then her eyes landed on me behind the desk, and her expression froze. You, she said, her voice trembling with disbelief. You did this. I didn't stand up right away. I just looked at her, calm and steady. So many emotions flashed through me. Hurt, anger, sadness, but they were all quiet now, controlled. I finally spoke, my voice even. No, Patricia. You did this. Years ago, when you threw me out. This is just the consequence. She blinked at me, speechless for a moment. Then she started to laugh bitterly. You think this makes you better than us? You're heartless. After everything your father did for you. I cut her off softly. Everything he did? He watched while you packed my bags and pushed me out of the only home I knew. He didn't say a word. That silence, that was what did the damage. Robert's head dropped. He looked older, smaller, like the weight of his choices had finally caught up to him. He didn't try to defend himself. His eyes met mine, and for a brief second I saw regret, deep, painful regret. But it was too late. Some things couldn't be undone. Patricia, still furious, slammed the letter on my desk. You'll regret this, she hissed. You have no idea what you've done. I stood up then, calmly placing my hands on the desk. No, Patricia. I know exactly what I've done. I took back what you stole from me. You didn't just take my house, you tried to take my spirit. But I rebuilt myself without your help. And now this house, it's mine, fair and square. She glared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she wanted to argue but couldn't find the words. Robert finally touched her arm lightly, whispering, "Let's go." His voice was weak, barely a whisper. For a moment, they just stood there, the two people who had once made me feel so small, now the ones standing defeated in front of me. Then Patricia turned and walked out, heels clicking hard against the floor. My father followed slowly behind her, pausing at the door. He looked back at me one last time, eyes filled with guilt, but I didn't say anything. When they were gone, I sat back down and let out a long breath. It didn't feel like victory. It felt like peace. For the first time in years, I wasn't the one being left behind. I was the one finally closing the door. When they finally left the office, I didn't feel the satisfaction I once imagined. There was no rush of revenge, no thrill of payback. Instead, I just sat there quietly, feeling something heavy lift off my chest. It wasn't happiness, but it was something close to peace. For years, I had carried the weight of that day. The hurt, the anger, the questions that never got answered. Watching them walk away didn't erase the past, but it gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time, closure. A few days later, I went back to the house. The keys jingled softly in my hand as I opened the door again. This time, it felt different. It wasn't about taking back power anymore. It was about letting go. The rooms were still empty and cold, the air thick with memories that seemed to cling to the walls. But now, instead of sadness, I felt calm. I walked through each room slowly, touching the walls, remembering small details from my childhood. The spot on the wall where my mom measured my height, the corner where our Christmas tree once stood, the kitchen where she'd sing while cooking. I could still hear her laugh in my head, soft and warm. For the first time in years, I didn't cry thinking about her. I just smiled. Most of the furniture that was left behind didn't mean anything to me. It felt like it belonged to another life, one that didn't fit me anymore. I decided to donate almost everything to charity. If someone else could make a new start with it, then it was better that way. I didn't want the ghosts of the past sitting in my new beginning. There was only one thing I kept, my mother's old rocking chair. It had been sitting in a corner of the living room, covered in dust, but still standing strong. I wiped it clean and ran my hand along the wood. It creaked a little, the same way it did when I used to sit in her lap as a child. It was the last piece of her love that remained in this house, and I couldn't let it go. I placed it by the window, exactly where it used to be when she was alive. That spot had the best sunlight in the afternoon. I sat there quietly for a while, watching the snow outside. The house no longer felt haunted by pain. It felt like it was breathing again. As I sat in that chair, I realized something important. I didn't need their apology, their guilt, or their approval. The person who had once been thrown out of this home was gone. I had become someone stronger. Someone who could stand in the same place that once broke her and feel peace instead of anger. That night, I locked the door behind me and whispered, "I'm finally home." After everything was settled, I decided it was time to bring life back into the house. The walls were cracked, the floors worn down, and the air still carried the quiet sadness of the past. But I wanted it to feel different now, not as a reminder of what I lost, but as a symbol of what I had rebuilt. I hired a small local team to help with the renovations. We started by painting the walls a soft cream color and replacing the old windows so the sunlight could pour in again. The house had always felt dark and heavy, but now, every morning, light filled every corner. It was like the house itself was finally breathing again. I spent weekends sanding wood floors, choosing curtains, and adding plants by the windows. I wanted every inch of the place to feel warm and alive. The kitchen, once the heart of my mom's joy, became my favorite part to restore. I added a big wooden table in the center and hung small white lights around the cabinets. It felt like the kind of space where people could sit, talk, and forget their worries. Exactly the kind of comfort I had once longed for. When the renovations were finally done, I stood in the doorway and took it all in. The house didn't just look new, it felt new. The weight that had lingered for years was gone. It was no longer the place where I had been thrown out. It was the place I had reclaimed with strength, patience, and love. That first Christmas after the renovations, I decided to do something special. I remembered what it felt like to be alone during the holidays, to have no one, nowhere to go, and no warmth waiting for me. I didn't want anyone else to feel that way. So I invited a few coworkers who didn't have family nearby, some neighbors who lived alone, and even a few people from the shelter downtown. That night, the house was full of laughter, music, and the smell of food. The dining table was covered with dishes, the fireplace glowed, and everyone shared stories. Watching them smile, I realized how far I'd come. From crying in my car on Christmas night to hosting a dinner filled with light and joy in the very house where I once felt unwanted. As the evening went on, I noticed how comfortable everyone looked, as if they truly belonged there. And that's when it hit me. That was what I had always needed, a sense of belonging. Now I was giving it to others. The house was no longer just a building or a piece of property. It had become something deeper, a place of healing. A space built not on pain, but on peace. I didn't just rebuild the home. I rebuilt the feeling of safety and love that had once been lost. The snow was falling softly that evening, covering the streets in a calm white silence. Samantha stood on her porch, wrapped in a warm coat, holding a cup of tea. Through the window, she could see the Christmas tree glowing brightly inside. The lights reflected off the glass, and for a moment, she just stood there, watching. The scene was peaceful, almost magical. It was the kind of peace she had dreamed of for years, but never thought she would truly feel. Inside, the sound of gentle laughter filled the air. The people she had invited, the ones who had no family to go to, were sitting around the fire, sharing stories and smiling. It was a simple moment, but for Samantha, it meant everything. The house that once pushed her away now welcomed everyone with open arms. She took a deep breath, feeling the cold air mix with warmth from inside. So much had changed. The pain, the loneliness, and the heartbreak she once carried had turned into strength and calm. She had rebuilt not just her life, but her heart. As she looked at the tree, her thoughts drifted back to the girl she used to be, the one who slept in her car, freezing and scared. That girl had promised herself to never beg to be loved again. And she had kept that promise. She didn't need anyone's approval anymore. She had learned to create her own peace, her own happiness. Samantha smiled softly and whispered to herself, "Some people build walls to keep others out. I built a home to let love back in." Her words faded into the cold air, but they felt powerful. They were the truth of her journey. Her story had started with rejection, but it ended with redemption. She didn't seek revenge. She didn't try to hurt the people who had hurt her. Instead, she chose something stronger, forgiveness and growth. That was the real victory. As the night went on, she went back inside. The fire crackled, and everyone turned to welcome her with smiles. She sat among them, feeling warmth spread through her chest. She realized she wasn't just hosting a dinner. She was building memories, creating moments of kindness, and sharing the very thing she once needed most: love. The snow kept falling outside, but inside, everything glowed with life. The house no longer held the shadows of the past. It had become something new, a symbol of peace, resilience, and hope. Samantha understood then that true revenge isn't about destruction. It's about rebuilding yourself so completely that the pain no longer controls you. The best payback isn't making them suffer. It's proving that you can rise above what they tried to break. That night, as she looked around her home one last time before bed, she felt gratitude instead of anger. The journey had been hard, but it had shaped her into someone strong, kind, and free. She had turned her pain into power, and that was the real lesson.